Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Wednesday, July 8th, 2020, and today I'm going to be talking about this article that was released by The Hill that says Biden-Sanders Unity Task Force rolls out platform recommendations. So essentially, after Joe Biden had been endorsed by Senator Bernie Sanders and he became the presumptive nominee, they formed a unity task force, essentially taking the best of the progressive policy and the best of the centrist Democratic policies and putting them all together into a platform that could be used in the general election, thus unifying the Democratic Party. So there are some things that haven't been included in these platform recommendations that we're going to talk about, but it is interesting to note that they are still working very heavily to make sure that Joe Biden does not lose any type of Bernie Sanders voters. What I mean by that is if you go ahead and take a look back at 2016, the Green Party got more than 1% of the vote, or around 1% in these three individual states. If Jill Stein had not been running, assuming those Green Party voters voted for the Democratic Party, Hillary Clinton would have won the election. Now, the Green Party has always gotten votes, but 2016 was really their peak. And, that had largely had to do with the fact that people did not like Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton. So a lot of those progressive Democrats, not a lot, but a portion of the progressive Democrats who weren't happy with Hillary Clinton as the nominee came out and voted for Jill Stein. And I will say that did make a difference in these three individual states. The reason why that's important to note is because, yes, Jill Stein got votes in other states, but these three states could have gone to Hillary Clinton, as I just said, which means that if Hillary Clinton had better appealed to these progressive voters, there is a chance she could have won the election. And I think Democrats are trying to make sure they go ahead and cover all of their bases. Not only are they reaching out to potential Republican voters, moderate Republicans voting for Joe Biden, but also to that progressive wing that seems to be forgotten. After the primary was practically over back in April of 2020, we didn't really talk much about Bernie Sanders' policies. When Biden had adapted some of the Elizabeth Warren policies, that was thrown under the rug. There wasn't really any major discussion about this. But this Unity Task Force actually includes some pretty notable names. If we go ahead and see Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, she's very well known across this country, along with John Kerry. Remember, he was the 2004 presidential nominee. So we're looking at, AOC and John Kerry, those type of minds working together. One may be very far to the left and the other may be a little bit closer to the center, at least in American politics. I don't really like comparing it to international politics because then the entire compass shifts. But looking at the, discussion about this task force, it says it was launched in May, laid out its platform recommendations on a number of key issues, including climate change, criminal justice reform, immigration policies, healthcare, education, and the economy in a 110-page document. So the healthcare platform focuses on expanding Obamacare instead of Medicare for all. So that's one fundamental change from a Sanders versus Biden platform. Medicare for all would not be included on this platform. Now, these are just recommendations. The Biden campaign does not have to take all of them, but he likely will take most of it. We're talking about a platform that needs to appeal to the left wing of the Bernie Sanders part, again, to avoid something like this happening, to avoid a narrow loss that could have been avoided if they had adapted one or two extra policies. Now, I know that seems a lot like appeasement, but that's generally what a general election does to a candidate. You take your own policies that people voted for you in the primary, and then you add on so you can win back those party voters, because the only reliable voters for Joe Biden are Democratic voters. Independents could sway one way or another. Certainly isn't Republicans. So if Biden can't even win amongst progressive Democrats, he probably won't even win the election, which is why it's important to note that Joe Biden actually performs very well amongst progressive Democrats, despite the loud, wing of the Democratic Party that is in firm opposition to Joe Biden still being the nominee, and would really like to see either Elizabeth Warren, possibly not even her, because a lot of them do have a problem with her. They really don't necessarily like Joe Biden, say they aren't going to vote for him on the general election. So, again, Biden probably won't win over all of the voters, but generally, based off the data that we see, we're only seeing about 7% fallout for the Biden campaign, from Sanders voters to Biden voters. So that's not really the worst. It was 11%, I believe, in 2016. So, yes, it may have made a difference then, but it probably won't make as much of a difference now, given Joe Biden's tremendous lead over Donald Trump nationwide. But in order to increase his support nationwide, he's going to have to take a step back from completely taking this platform to heart. Yes, unity amongst the Democratic Party is important. But if you go too far to the left, you may push off some independent voters. The problem with Bernie Sanders being being discussed as the most electable candidate, just because Bernie Sanders did poll ahead of Donald Trump, Joe Biden always outperformed him, and I mean always. In 2016, Bernie Sanders drastically outperformed Hillary Clinton. The numbers were on the side of the Sanders campaign then. Now, not so much. Joe Biden in literally every single swing state outperformed Bernie Sanders. If you take the overall RCP average, don't cherry pick polls. But when you're looking at the Biden Sanders unity ideology, sure, it would be great for the Democratic Party, but you have to realize that if they did adapt Medicare for all, that may push away some independent voters. When I say independent voters, I really mean conservative-leaning independent voters. Usually in this country, we have most, based off party registration, most people, no, a plurality of people are Democrats, then it goes down to independents, then to Republicans. But when Republicans tend to win presidential elections, it is on the backs of conservative independent voters. Now, some of these independent voters may be inclined to vote for Joe Biden in this election, but he is going to have to make sure that their platform can be, that his platform can be adapted to all types of voters, not just Democratic ones. So while I do think that this is great news for the Biden campaign, that they're actually going to go ahead and take a look at this, and that they're working closely with, AOC, a very notable member of Congress, and then John Kerry, of course, another notable former Democratic nominee, Secretary of State. This is crucial for Biden, but also I think he does not need to completely adapt everything here and needs to take a little bit of a step back and realize, which he definitely does, realize that he's not only trying to win Democratic voters. So as we, pretty much go through this article, they discuss some things about criminal justice reform and other types of issues. The Democrats would end the war on drugs, decriminalize and reschedule marijuana, and end the practice of cash bail. So a lot of these things are mainly bent on reforming this country, but a lot of it is adapted from both the Sanders and Biden campaigns. So what, Joe Biden may not have stood for a couple of months ago, he's going to need to adapt if he's able to, or if he wants to win over these Bernie Sanders voters, because this 1% did make all the difference. And again, I'm not blaming Jill Stein for Hillary Clinton's, inability to win over these Bernie Sanders progressive voters, but if they had to turn to a candidate, it wouldn't have been Hillary Clinton. It was Jill Stein. They weren't going to vote for Gary Johnson. They obviously weren't going to vote for Donald Trump, and if they didn't want to vote for Hillary, the only candidate they realistically could have voted for was Jill Stein, and she did fundamentally make a difference. Again, not blaming her for the loss, but you do need to note that if those voters had voted for Hillary, which they might have, if Hillary had adapted a better platform and was just an all-around better candidate, she could have very well won that election. It was a winnable election for Democrats, and this election is 100% winnable. 2020, I believe, is at times Donald Trump's race to lose when he's soaring ahead in approval rating. Not really, he's never really approved of, but doing better amongst his disapproval rating, it has since dwindled. Okay, so I will say back in 3 months ago, it might have been Trump's election to lose when he was ahead in March. Ahead of Joe Biden in a lot of things, not necessarily national polling data, but doing very well in swing states, doing very well with this approval, handling a coronavirus approval skyrocketed. So back then I would have said that was Trump's election to lose, but now it's definitely the Democrats. They have the advantage, they have the energy, they have the voter registration, they have the turnout numbers from 2018, and looking at the combination of a number of things that Donald Trump is saying are only detrimental to his campaign. So all Biden really needs to do is not say much. He just needs to lay back and let the voters decide who they're voting for. And right now, a lot of people are voting for Joe Biden, not because of Joe Biden's campaigns, but more so because of what Donald Trump is saying on Twitter, his campaign ads, the things that his campaign is putting out, the things that are said through the White House press secretary. A lot of those things are negatively reflecting on President Trump. So this is great news for, I would say, the progressive wing of the Democratic Party, but I don't think that Joe Biden is going to completely adopt every single type of progressive recommendation, because keeping in mind the progressive wing of the Democratic Party is not the majority of the Democratic Party. So while he may be appeasing the 40%, he may also be pushing away some independents or even some conservative Democrats from supporting him. Now, I don't think that's going to fundamentally change much, considering that a lot of Democrats view Donald Trump as a horrible president and wouldn't even consider voting for him. But when it comes down to it, if we're talking about policy by policy, some independents may be more inclined to vote for a Trump type policy platform rather than a progressive one if they don't necessarily lean that way. There's a reason why those voters, are independents and not, Democrats. So I think this is good news. Other than that, I don't think it's going to change much on the national polling data. I really don't see that 7% of the Bernie Sanders wing, which is only 30% of the Democratic primary vote, saying they're not voting for Joe Biden. While it did make a difference in 2016, that's because the races were a lot narrower. Hillary Clinton only led by 3% on election day. Biden leads by 10% now. So he's outperforming her 7% nationwide, which would definitely translate to outperforming in the states that she narrowly lost by less than a percentage. So I do think that while this is going to win over some voters and Biden is doing more than Hillary Clinton did in 2016, I still truly think that the numbers are probably going to roughly end up the same. And Joe Biden, I still think, is the favorite to win the election. Absolutely. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and the Twitter. Go ahead and check out the video on your screen and then a playlist for my 2020 election nights. You can go ahead and check those out. Speaking of election nights, I will have a Senate election night out tomorrow. And again, thank you guys so much for watching this video, and I will see you all tomorrow.